that I'm allowed to do another show. All right. It looks like the data's. I know you guys always point out that there's a little bit of a delay where sometimes I'm live, but I'm still like, are we live? And I know that, but I'm a one-man show. I don't have a production editor on site to give me a thumbs up. So, I got to roll with it myself. And it looks like we are live. I have seen it. It is good. I have seen it, and it is good. What's up, everybody? Happy Monday. I hope you are doing well. Good afternoon to all my East Coasters. Good morning to all my West Coasters. Good evening if you're in an evening time zone. And, of course, to everybody in the future who's a day ahead, New Zealand, Australia. How you guys doing? Can you solve climate change for the rest of us? I mean, you're in the future. No pressure. Anyway, special shout out to everyone who makes this show possible. Our friends over at ZT.com, ZHITEA.com. Their tea kind of rules. You can get it wholesale now because of the pandemic. Amazing independent tea shop and friends of the show. Our friends over at triageoil.com, TRIAGE oil.com. Trendy name makes topical pain oil that I personally use on my neck. And it works wonders. Check that out, triageoil.com. He also educates the public on cannabis issues with his show. And in left is the only place to find all the articles and videos from all your favorite streamers and outlets and content creators. I'm there. They update it twice a day. To learn more and subscribe to everything they got going on and to join their Discord, you can check them out at independentleft.media. Also, I got to mention, I did their theme song. All right, without further ado, I am very excited to talk to my guest today. She is a writer. She is a survivor, and her book that is out now is called Left Out: When the Truth Doesn't Fit In. Please welcome to the show, Tara Reade. Tara, how are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it very much. And thanks for doing the show. And I'm excited to talk to you about your book and about all kinds of other things here. But I kind of wanted to start sort of at the beginning of when you came forward with your story. I first heard about you on Katie Halper's show. That was where I first heard about your story. And you had mentioned, trying to come forward before and different ways you were trying to tell your story before. Could you kind of, unpack some of that, like kind of give a summary of what happened there?
Sure. Yeah, I first came forward in 1993 when I was working for Joe Biden. I filed a sexual harassment report, which is somewhere in the archives in the University of Delaware, which he has sealed. I came forward publicly to the media in 2019 when I saw Lucy Flores was getting really kind of torn apart by the media, and the other 6 women that had come forward about being uncomfortable with Joe Biden's lack of boundaries is how the press put it, or, all that kind of thing. And I had worked for him and I had experienced the sexual harassment and sexual assault. And so I went ahead and came forward. I was immediately dismissed as a Russian agent. That was the narrative at first for a few months, still kind of on and off. And then in 2020, I came forward with the full history, including the assault, and was able to, Katie Halper actually move the story forward. Ryan Grimm, actually, his investigative reporting kind of brought forward the Time's Up issue, because I had gone before all that to Time's Up for assistance, and did not know that Anita Dunn, who ran SKD Knickerbocker, who was affiliated with Time's Up, was actually working for Joe Biden's campaign and was being paid by him. So, moving forward, the media, because our country is now kind of being run by PR agencies, they really had just, developed this technique of smear, silence. And we kind of went back and forth throughout the year doing that, trying to get my story forward. And I was trying to present it in a dignified way, because it's difficult to talk about. And immediately they started class shaming me and talking to old landlords. They posted my divorce. They posted my bankruptcy publicly. I mean, it was pretty gross how I was attacked. So,
yeah.
Well, that's kind of the summary, the highlights.
You bring up the landlord thing, and I'm not, I'm certainly not trying to make light of anything here, but I remember when I first saw that, and I just thought, I was like, who on this planet hasn't had a problem with a landlord before? Who has
Right.
that not happened to? Unless
Right.
of course you're really super rich, but everybody else, because guess what? A lot of landlords, very scummy people. Not all of them, but a lot of them, very scummy people. And you're looking to smear somebody by bringing up an issue they have with a landlord.
Right. And some of
Welcome,
them were
welcome
like
to life.
renting. Yeah, they're renting to me, like, and telling me, don't tell anyone you live here so they don't have to report it to the IRS. And they're going after me. It was just hilarious. Um, but well, not hilarious. Looking back, I'm starting to laugh at all the absurdity. But at the time, it was quite upsetting. And in fact, I lost my housing because of the smears. Because the then current landlords read all that, read about the death threats, and said, even though I had paid rent, it was in the middle of a pandemic. They evicted me because they said they were voting for Joe Biden. So,
Wait.
I
That was their.
lost.
They said
Mhm.
we're voting for Joe Biden, so we're evicting you.
Almost exactly those words. They said they came down early in the morning and said, we heard that you got death threats on the news. We heard that what you're saying about Joe Biden, and we support Joe Biden, and you can't live here anymore. You can't be on our property. And it was a month to month, and I had paid rent, so it was inconvenient. But I had to, I had to leave. And then when I was staying in places until I found a permanent home, um, someone had tracked where I was and posted the hotel I was staying at and posted it on Facebook and said, this is where Joe Biden's accuser is, with a map. And so it was crazy. I went through that from about May. I was going through the death threats and all of that or actually April, because it started with the 2019 until currently. And then just currently I had some more issues. It affected work. I lost all my work because of it. And it just became very, very political. And I have been trying to send the message that sexual assault and sexual harassment is nonpartisan. It's, and I can't help who the person is that did this. And now he happens to be the president. So,
So going through, this, you come out with your story on Katie Helper, and of
mhm,
course the smears start. What
right.
kind of correspondence, if any, did you have with the corporate media as that was going on? And so, like, a little bit of like why I'm asking this question. You
Mhm,
know, the first rule of argumentation that I feel like should just be something that is posted on every billboard in this
mhm,
country for the sake of media literacy is that when somebody just attacks a source and they have nothing else to go by, the
mhm,
lesson there is they have nothing else to go by. All of the investigations that I saw
right.
from the corporate media were all just smears on your character and just attacks on your character. So,
Yeah.
what kind of correspondence did you or your family or anyone else have, if any, while this cycle was just being amplified?
Well, some articles were printed without my involvement. In other words, they just dug up dirt and whatever. I had friends contact me that private investigators had walked up and down one of the roads I lived on, knocking on doors, asking if people knew me and what they could say about me. And if it was anything positive, they wouldn't print it. They wouldn't take it. New York Times, Washington Post were probably the largest offenders. New York Times called me up. I remember the reporter said, rumor has it you have an online Russian boyfriend. And I
Oh,
said, rumor has it. I said, are you a tabloid now? Like, what are you saying? And she said, well, we have two sources that say you have connections to Russian, online Russian boyfriend. So I got my attorney involved and said, no, I don't. And nothing wrong with that. I mean, even if I did, who cares? But I didn't. And they wouldn't reveal one of the sources, and so they protected their sources and whatever. And they printed it anyway. And it was, for me, it just taught me a huge lesson. Number one, I just don't trust the media the same way I did before this all happened. And it just kind of drove home secondarily, that you can try as much as you want, but if you don't have resources, like some people do, the smears are going to happen. And, all you can do is try to hope that, the truth kind of bubbles up slowly, which it has. I mean, I never lied about my education. I never perjured myself. All of those things that were asserted are now being found to be untrue. And of course, the media is not really talking about it, but they will. They'll retract eventually, I hope. So, yeah. But my family was contacted. My daughter was called and harassed, and my brother was, and so everybody was contacted by social media trolls, investigators, and the corporate media.
But a lot of these smear pieces, it only happened so often where people reached out to you and said, do you want to respond directly to what we're about to print to clarify any issues?
Oh, right. Yeah. Like the Politico article that calls me a manipulative user and all that. Yeah, I never had any contact with that reporter. There was many articles that were just written off rumors or whatever. And I think that goes directly back to Anita Dunn, who runs that PR firm that worked for Joe Biden. If you look at the FEC, there was $2.2 million she was paid by his campaign. And now she was just elevated to be the senior White House advisor in the White House. So she had previously smeared Rose McGowan. Rose McGowan just tweeted about that. So other Harvey Weinstein survivors. So it's pretty scary that PR firms can hold our fate for a few $1 million.
That's a good quote. Firms can hold our fate for a few $1 million. Somebody watching, tweet that. I like that. Somebody tweet that. We're doing this thing, but somebody else tweet that. I like it.
Yeah.
You brought up Rose McGowan. Now, I hope I get this right, and correct me if I misspeak here. She wrote the foreword to your newest book?
She did.
Okay. So how did that collaboration come to happen?
She reached out to me through another Weinstein survivor and found me. I was kind of hard to find at the time. And we talked and kept talking. And then our relationship and friendship grew. And there were some parallels between the attacks that were happening to me and what happened to her. And so she really was solid about giving me advice. Okay, get ready, because they're going to do this. And they're going to, like, for instance, the criminal thing, they tried to go after her with criminal charges. Tried to set her up and smear her. And she kind of warned me, and she was right. The Monterey DA started an investigation into perjury, and they wanted to have me put in jail for perjury. And of course, that fell apart because I didn't lie about my education. So it's been, but the stress that it caused, and then I had to hire lawyers, it's quite something. So she just discussed how powerful people like Harvey Weinstein, like Joe Biden, how they try to get rid of a story like this, a part of their history that they don't want to come forward.
Well,
yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not an uncommon rhetorical event. You know what I mean? Like it's not uncommon where you see when a very wealthy, powerful person is involved, there's this big smear campaign against the victim. I mean, it happens time and time again, whether the person's an athlete or a politician. And of course, especially if they're a politician, or, you brought up Weinstein, especially if they're in Hollywood, which,
right.
I mean, and this is just an aside, but I know you've done some acting before and stuff like that. Sometimes, as I'm in the LA area during the pandemic, there are those grumblings where people are just like, oh, Hollywood might never be the same again. Hollywood might never be the same again. And I'm just sitting here and I'm like, somebody needs to explain to me how that's a bad thing. Can someone explain to me? Why are we saying this like that's not awesome?
Exactly.
There's certain parts of Hollywood that need to go away forever. And if they do, when all this is like said and done and it's a different type of industry, I don't think that's a bad thing. I really don't. I mean, you look at you're a theater person, so let me kind of run this analogy by you real quick. Like I kind of think what I would love to see happen in like the kind of the what's the phrase, like from the darkest clouds comes the brightest skies, or
Right.
you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I would love if when all this is said and done, not just Hollywood, but just kind of like creative culture in general in the United States, we kind of go back to the kind of fringe theater movement in New York in the 30s, and then later in like the 60s and 70s, where you had like these anti-capitalist theaters going on and stuff like that. And it was the pie was kind of more divided and it wasn't as homogenized. We have a chance for that to happen again. And I really hope it does. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, that's where a lot of the writers in the 30s, I mean, remember the salons they had back then as far as writing goes as well. You know, John Steinbeck and, Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Edna St. Vincent Millay, they all came from that kind of the 20s and the 30s, from that freedom of expression it's really being suppressed. And F. Scott Fitzgerald was the first person, one of the first writers, well-renowned, to really call out Hollywood for its, because he didn't like their adaptation of his book and he denounced it. And he was one of the first to do that. But I think that right now, like, for instance, what you're having with whole platforms deleting people, I did not vote for Joe Biden. I did not vote for Donald Trump, nor am I a Trump supporter. I am a independent now, and I would say progressive independent. So I'm more, I believe there should be, healthcare and access to education and all of that. But it disturbed me to see how cavalier it was to just basically wipe out hundreds of thousands of accounts because they didn't like what they were saying. And in my case, Facebook, my name, Tara Reade, was considered election interference. And so I was suppressed. So I just deleted my Facebook. But
wow.
But yeah, and that was done by the head of a Democratic Party from one of the states. They mailed in, it was a physician actually, mailed into Facebook and said, she's election interference. And Joe Biden's camp kept claiming I was a Russian plant or a Russian agent, and that had some legs for a little while. And but that's the danger, all this misinformation. So my kind of hit back was to write this book, and left out when the truth doesn't fit in. And lucky enough, I was able to get that published, and it's still being suppressed on Amazon. But I had the hardcovers coming out February 15th. And we have a little event we're doing online to benefit a sexual assault prevention center, February 20th. And I'll do a reading, and Rose McGowan is reading the foreword. And we'll give some resources to survivors. But I'm going to keep trying to help other survivors speak out. One of the, I think, more amusing things that the trolls said about me was they said after the election that I was going to get, my Russian online boyfriend was going to get me a Siberian horse farm, and I'd go to Siberia. So I like horses, so that's awesome.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, because you talk about how just your faith in the media is just totally diminished, which of course is beyond understandable. And are there really kind of moments where you're taken aback at just how propagandized people are in this country? I mean, for me, and my experience is nothing compared to yours, but I mean, for me, things really started smelling funny to me in 2016, where intelligent people honestly believed that friends and colleagues of mine were Russian spies because they did work with RT America, an American bureau. And that was when I started feeling like something's not right in the air. Something very disturbing is going on in the place that I call home. And I feel like this was a long time brewing. So have you kind of found that? And also for the yin and the yang, there have, I hope, been some very uplifting moments too, where people have come out in your support. So, I mean, where are you at emotionally with all that? Do you have optimism in just this country as a whole, or are you kind of just, I don't know what to think yet. I'll let you know when the dust settles, or kind of where are you at with all that?
Oh, I'm very cynical right now. And I'll just put that out there.
It's
I mean,
fair.
what I've, I just, and I think Rose McGowan put it really well that we're just in a cult. And, my daughter actually made this really amazing observation. She's an adult now and has been going through this with me watching. And she just said, it's like, Mom, you called out the cult leader and all the sheep don't know what to do.
Mm,
And because there is this sort of weird fixation that Biden's the savior. And all I said was, and many things can be true at once. Like some of the policies that are coming forth out of the administration, I support. I was a lifelong Democrat. I'd like them to be more progressive. I'd like them to stop saying, oh, we're going to get $1,400 instead of $2,000 checks, right? Like everyone else. But what's amazing to me is just how I feel like everything's already kind of canned. Like the whole thing with Bernie Sanders, it was obvious how much of a movement was behind him. And yet we were just told to believe that that wasn't so, that everyone was behind Joe Biden. And if you even take it back, further. And as far as 2016, I mean, they blamed it on Russia. Russia's always a convenient enemy. Their
yeah.
economy is a little bit bigger than Texas. They're a vast country, a lot to handle, and they have their own thing going on. And they're easy, kind of an easy scapegoat because they were a former enemy. You just make them current, kind of play like a placeholder enemy, right? And so you just kind of swirl the propaganda around. We have to be careful, our elections being interfered with in 2016, when in actuality, Hillary Clinton didn't go to Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And I grew up in Wisconsin. I can tell you, she should have gone to Wisconsin.
Sure.
And it might have had a different income, So it's really beyond the pale of how much propaganda we're fed. And that's why I'm cynical. Like when I read, the New York Times did a headline last week, for instance, this is a good one, and said, Joe Biden is the most devout Catholic president we've ever had. What does that even mean?
Yeah, I mean, I was about to ask you that. What does that even mean? Did
Right?
they tell us? I mean, did New York Times expand on this, or did they just leave it there?
And I can tell you from my experiences with him, I'm not following the devoutness, right? That was,
Yeah.
And so it's just, and then yesterday Newsweek came out with a thing saying supporters and left independent journalists are blaming Biden when they shouldn't, like that he about the $2,000 checks, that the 1,400, whatever. And again, see, that's just spin. And how long are we going to allow ourselves to just be spun? I don't know, as a country.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you say like people just can't accept that like two things can be true at once. Like, yes, it is true Donald Trump is awful, but it is also true that Joe Biden is awful. And I'm like you, I didn't vote for either one. I mean, Biden told me many times not to vote for him, so I did take his advice. I mean, I did listen to one of the things he said. If you believe Tara Reade, you probably shouldn't vote for me. Well, guess what? I believe you, so I didn't vote for him. There were a lot of other reasons I didn't vote for him too, but I didn't vote for him. I didn't vote for Trump either, and I think people just really want to hold on to that idea that there's a good guy and a bad guy. And it's a hard pill to swallow that, well, sometimes there's only villains going on. Sometimes there's only villains. So my editor, Joe, was curious about this. Seeing like what you've gone through and kind of knowing what you were up against, looking back on it, is there anything... I mean, A, is there anything that maybe you wish you had done differently? And B, is there anything you could have done differently even? Or was this sort of, I mean, they had their agenda no matter what you did?
They had their agenda, so there's that. I wish back when it happened, I would have made the police report when it happened, like my mom wanted me to do. And I made the sexual harassment report. Now, how much good that would have done, I don't know. And especially in 1993. And Um, but the other thing I wish I would have done is, well, I would say to other survivors, scrub your social media. So, because they just go after you and hack. I had my website hacked. So I guess I would have learned tech a little bit better to protect myself from hostile actors, if you will. But I don't regret coming forward at all. I don't know. I mean, in 2019, I tried to come forward with the whole thing and got scared and got really shut down. And then I wanted times up around me. I wanted a women's movement kind of around me, and just didn't get that. And I just feel like things happen the way they're supposed to happen, even if they were kind of difficult. And that my story of what happened to me is a lesson in two regards. One is that it shouldn't matter how powerful the man or person is that you're coming forward about. They shouldn't have the power to silence. And so my story had a chilling effect for other survivors of Biden to come forward. I'm sure, they saw the way I was torn apart. So that needs to not happen again. And you shouldn't have to have a ton of resources to be able to step up into the spotlight, so to speak, to tell your story. There should be a safe way to do that without having your life destroyed. And I don't regret it at all. I do not regret coming forward. I do wish people would have listened more, but they didn't. I wish that another candidate, any one of the Democrats, were more qualified than Joe Biden, in my opinion, to be president, including Kamala Harris. So I don't know. I can't go back in time. So I guess two things would be is if you are going to come forward about a powerful person, make sure you understand, security and provide yourself with safety and a good safety net. I think I was kind of in the perfect storm of this pandemic and then this election. When I was trying to come forward at one point, Joe Biden was going to drop out, and that didn't happen. So it might have had a different outcome had he dropped out.
So
I don't know.
I want to ask you about just kind of where you were at on the inauguration. I mean, what was it like for you to just kind of see this guy become president? And obviously it's not like, I mean, just where were you at? Because I know, you don't like Trump. And I mean, I don't like Trump either. And so I think so many people were emotionally in a place where it's like, okay, well, I am happy Trump's gone.
Right.
I am not happy Biden is becoming president. And that's a weird headspace to be in. But that's our system. So for someone like you, where the headspace goes way beyond the political and into, what happened in your life. I mean, how was that for you?
I don't think I've even processed all of it yet. It was so hard. That day I took a break, and the person that helps me with social media kind of took over my stuff for me. Because I feel a sense of betrayal from my own country. I feel a sense of betrayal that I worked as a Democrat. I worked in politics. I worked hard for environmental issues and women's issues. I worked as an advocate. And like all of my work was just discounted and brushed aside for this, man. And it's the Democratic Party has displayed more hypocrisy than I've even seen from the Republicans, if that's possible. And in my opinion, and they are not only, allowing predators like Joe Biden and others in the Democratic Party, they reward them with more and more power. And they use the Me Too movement like this hypocritical shield that they actually don't believe in. And it was a really difficult day. Because it's like saying, well, if you recall, and when I did the interview with Katie Halper and then Megyn Kelly, I talk about what he said to me after the assault that was almost more damaging than the assault itself. Yeah. When he told me that, I was nothing. And so that's how I felt. And I don't want other people to feel like that. I don't want other survivors to feel like they're nothing. because the perpetrator was powerful. Excuse me if I get emotional, but it's hard. It's hard to have your country not only turn its back on you, part of your country, but to vilify you. And now I'm just trying to, embrace, the villainary part, that at least I have good company. They tend to be villainizing the left progressives altogether anyway. So whatever, just join the club.
So, well, you describe yourself as an independent now.
Yes.
So kind of, as far as politics goes going forward, where do you think you might find, find some folks you want to vote for? I mean, are you leaning green, or are you into Movement for a People's Party, or are you just kind of one step at a time? I'll see if there's any candidates, or.
I'm looking at the People's Party. I think that's interesting. I think we definitely need to get out of this plurality. I think that the having the two-party system is not working, and it's not making people happy. The voting system needs to change so that the candidate that you vote for, the next one, then can be raised up. That I think certain states are doing that. I would have loved to have seen Bernie Sanders as president. At one point, I liked Elizabeth Warren. I liked Cory Booker. And as far as Kamala goes, my comment, she's more conservative than I am, and kind of establishment Democrat. That's the only reason I'm not as supportive. But by the same token, I would love to see her president over Biden. And I feel like she would be a good leader. And it's so strange that we have to get women into positions of power kind of sideways in our country. We can't just do it, like we have to do it that way. So my plan is to look at the People's Party, probably is closest to my kind of, and then just remain independent and watch what happens. Those parties need to be given momentum. So in other words, we don't want them splitting the vote, which is what Democrats will accuse them of doing. Right. But the Democrats have become Republican. I mean, I've been in politics since the 90s, and I'm telling you that they are voting the same way Ronald Reagan people voted. That's the Democratic Party has moved to that kind of, framework, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I think you're 100% right. I think in some ways they're almost even worse than, because I tweeted the day of the inauguration. I'm like, yes, I am happy Trump's gone, but I am not happy that when we needed an FDR style presidency, we are getting another Reagan term. Which, right. Reagan terms are pretty much all we've had in my lifetime. And I include Barack Obama in that.
Oh, absolutely.
By his own words, he describes me. He's like, I would be considered a moderate Republican. Barack Obama said that himself. And still,
yeah, you're absolutely right. And he said it. And Joe Biden said it when he said to those billionaires in that fundraiser, nothing will fundamentally change. Listen to people when they tell you who they are. That's what I would say. Well, Trump was crazy, and he was more of an entertainer than he was. Than he was a politician. At one point I heard he had been a Democrat at one point in his life. I don't know. His obviously his policies to me were really craven and not acceptable. But that said, I have respect for people who maybe don't share my views. It doesn't mean they're bad people, or they're, I don't support white supremacy or racism, obviously. However, there are some Republicans who don't, who are just fiscally think differently. And it's, we're just so far apart right now. It feels like you have to be careful of everything you say. And I think people want to get to a place where they can have like some really authentic dialogue about what's wrong, without fear of, being canceled or being, discarded.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, let me run this by you. I think that when you just take a snapshot, and if you had to just take Donald Trump, Joe Biden, between the two of them, they pretty much embalm everything that is wrong with our system between the two of them. Because on one side, you just have this plutocrat showman who was just tired of buying politicians over the years. So I'll just skip the middleman and let them buy me for a change.
Right.
And then on the other side, you have this, predatory blank suit who has just played the game in a very dishonest way for 40 plus years and has failed up because of it. So it's like everything that's wrong with our system can be embodied in these two people, and they're your choices, which says to me, we are going backwards. We are somehow going backwards.
Yeah, I think even backwards, we're just going in the wrong direction altogether. And the misogyny, like people were saying to me, well, it's the voting for the less of two evils. And then someone else, I don't remember the person who said the quote. It wasn't me, but it's an interesting quote where they said, well, it's still evil. So it doesn't matter. Like there's lesser of two evils, but you're still supporting evil. And I think that's what you're trying to say. It's just both of them are empty as far as their value system. I think what's really dangerous about Biden is he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. He's presenting as someone who wants unity and peace, and he uses all these platitudes and promise $2,000 checks. And then when he's in office, everything's unwinding. And it's the same old, same old. And I remember having like pretty heated discussions with, just not about my situation, just about policy in general, with leftists who were like, we have to vote for him because we can get him to move left. You're not moving that.
Yeah. Well, isn't that how compromise always works though? You give somebody everything they want and then they give you what you want. Isn't that how that works in life?
Right.
Hey, I'm selling a car. It costs $200. All right, I'll give you $200 now, but after this, I'm going to say it should cost $150. It doesn't work that way. That's
you got to buy the oil changes for the car. No, like, sorry about it. We're seeing, and the thing with the pandemic, when he was saying he could handle the pandemic, he had a plan, his team had a plan, and then he immediately made an announcement that, so, and now they're waiting to the end of the day to talk to Republicans about the whole package that they were finally going to pass. So, I'm really, and then as far as rape culture, institutionalized rape culture, by electing Joe Biden, we have just given carte blanche to abusers, predators, that nothing happens. There's no consequences, and you can even be rewarded, And I'm wondering if on some level, the publicity that came around what happened with my history with him even gave him more publicity he would have gotten had he not, had that going on. I don't know. But, we need to get away from everything being run by public relations, and we have to take hold of our own democracy. And that means work. And people just want like mom and dad to like take care of things. Well, it's not going to happen. We're mom and dad. It's a democracy. So we have to take an active role in it. And it means having privy to information that we might not like, but we have to deal with it for our own, benefit, our own family's benefit. It means being educated on the issues and knowing what we want. We can't just hand it over and give consent, because then consent becomes, just implied. And that gets us into wars.
Yeah. So let's move on to what you're doing now. Let's talk about the book, Left Out When the Truth Doesn't Fit In. That's a pretty grab you title, So let's talk about the book some. What's kind of going on there?
I was really lucky that I didn't know, I had this book, I had this concept. I was writing a lot while this was going on, because I tend to write, and that's what I do. So I put it together pretty quickly, a rough draft, and no one, of course, was going to publish me because of who I was. But I was lucky enough to find TV guest expert, Jackie Jordan, who decided, she was upset by the way I was treated and upset. And she kind of put herself professionally on the line to try to get, that out. So I really liked doing the book. I talk about like some of the things that happened, which you'll read about, like, for instance, the Washington Post, the way, like the first question out of that reporter's mouth, Beth Reinhardt, who was, by the way, a Pulitzer Prize winner, and I was so impressed to talk to her. And the first question she said to me was, "You've made an accusation against Joe Biden. Don't you know that's going to hurt his campaign?" And that's how she said it.
Wow.
And it kind of went downhill from there and got really worse. You can read about it in the book. And she had me by the end of it in tears. And which is, I guess, what her goal was. And so did a couple other reporters, but it was just pretty much that attack, just pounce on, on that. And so the writing of the book was cathartic. And also the last chapter has to do with resources and things for survivors. So I felt that it was a way for me to offset that chilling effect that my story had, and yeah, so I'm working on that. And then we're doing the person, Avalon Claire, who's an illustrator who has done a lot of the graphics on my Twitter account that you've seen. She and I are collaborating on a podcast, and we're going to call it Left Out. So that'll come in the spring. And we, again, it's to kind of lift the voices of people that normally, they're going to get squashed like I did, kind of.
What are the main things that society really needs to do to create a much better world for survivors, and then even more importantly, create a society where there are less survivors? That didn't come out right, but I think you know what I mean by that.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah. I
think, like men like you, like my brother Colin, men like you that are allies, basically, that want to help women, and in fact, men are victims too. So I don't want to, be gender specific. Men are victims of violence as well, sexual violence. So I think in general, just having more education, more dialogue about it in a real way, like we're having today, an authentic conversation, where we kind of hash it out a little. And but doing it young, that education piece with young people, both, girls and boys, just kind of, bringing through, and again, not to be gender specific, but just talking about all those issues with gender and with power and with control, because sexual assault has more to do with power and control, and so does sexual harassment, right? And you look at Hollywood and you look at what we're being fed as, what I grew up being fed of how I had to be as a female, like what I was supposed to be like. It's pretty, it's pretty awful to be sexualized so young. You're being told to be a certain way. And, like one of the things that come through is that value, right? Well, women's value isn't dependent on how they look, or it shouldn't be, right? But I grew up in that environment. So changing that will make a big dent in rape culture, making them access to education, access to legal resources when it does happen, consequences for those actions. And then, I just think that trauma-informed reporters, when they're doing stories about this, like, for instance, Rich McHugh or Ronan Farrow, those are trauma-informed, consent-based reporters. They're trained. Like when I did my interviews with Rich McHugh, when he had to come to the details of the assault, he knew how to ask the question without making me feel horrible. I didn't know if he believed me or not, and that wasn't the point. But like Beth Reinhardt, in comparison, was almost abusive, right? So I think, it's the way those stories are covered, the way they're handled, that trauma informed is really important. And then education is huge. I think, just having those real dialogues about, sexuality and power. And I really still think that what happened with Biden, with me, was more about power and control than anything else.
So, where can people learn more, and where can people pick up your book?
My Twitter handle is at Reade Alexandra, and my book is available at authortarareade.com and also Amazon. And the hardback will be coming out February 15th on Amazon. And this spring, I'll also be doing an Audible book, so it'll be available in audiobooks as well.
And you mentioned a podcast coming up, and you also mentioned some other resources you're putting together for survivors. Are there any other kind of projects you got in the pipeline down the road related to all that you'd like to?
That's the beginning kind of part, but I really want to get more involved with those projects that help with survivor resources, having them available to people depending, not contingent on their income. So you don't have to have, a lot of money to be able to access them. There's some good ones out there, like echotraining.org is a good one with Lou Godbold. She's one of the Weinstein survivors. They help with both sexual assault and domestic violence with education pieces. Rose McGowan has a great album for healing. It uses theta beats. It's called Planet 9. So if you just look that up on SoundCloud or whatever, so I want to do that. I want to kind of raise up artists and writers and other survivors that have things to say, and that'll be the future.
I wanted to ask you a question related to healing for someone who has been through what you've been through. What all does the healing process involve, and is it an ongoing thing, or does it have a finish line?
Yeah, it's not. I don't think it's linear. I'm still kind of. There's stuff I haven't even really processed. I guess you use the word process, but I haven't even really looked at it. There's friends and family that didn't, support me, that I'm still, those are the ones that are really hurting, rather than the media stuff, which is kind of in my mind, still outside myself.
When you say didn't support, do you mean they don't believe you, or do you mean?
Yeah, I've had a couple of friends that they believed me, but they didn't want to support me publicly, or they didn't want to support me because it's Joe Biden. And again, into that cult thing, it's weird. It's like, no, this isn't the right time. You need to just be quiet, and, it's never the right time. That's what they tell survivors, but they also tell that to progressive leftists. So I think they can relate to being told that. But yeah, I had a couple, I know I had a former boss that believed me, that knew it happened, and said, we can't have 4 more years of Trump, and trashed me. And I was just like, okay, what do you do with that? So I still am kind of healing from those betrayals. And what I would say is that, I have a horse. I've done equine therapy before. That's really helpful for me. EMDR is a technique that helps with trauma. So it looks different for everyone.
Can you explain the technique a little bit? Because I've heard of that before, but I'm not. Do you mind kind of explaining EMDR a little bit? Because I've heard about it, but I don't know if I fully grasp how it works.
Yeah. Exactly. And I'm a layperson to that too, so I'll do the best I can. But it's just eye movement, and it has to do with the connection of the brain. Because when you're in trauma, it tends to be the frontal part, the primitive part of your brain, that responds in fight or flight. And what EMDR allows is processing of trauma into your brain, as putting that memory into a place where you can actually think about it and not have the physical response to just run or freeze, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it kind of moves you through it. Yeah. And they use eye movement and talk therapy, so to speak.
Right on. Well, there's a couple chats here for you. If you don't mind, I'd like to read them to you.
Okay.
Gina, ciao Gina, come stai oggi? I hope everything is going well. And Gina says, thank you, Tara. Your strength gives me and many other survivors the courage to share our stories. And Gina goes on to share that my verdict was overturned and my rapist was able to walk free because I cried after it happened. And Title 9 said that was me admitting guilt.
Oh,
very sorry to hear that, Gina. And
I'm really sorry.
Thank you very much for sharing. Megan says,
Thank you.
You are not nothing, Tara. Your courage really inspired me to keep my own fire going this past election cycle against the bad faith trolls. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
A peace sign. And Gordon says, keep it up. And there's a pair lifting weights. People know that I love the pair emojis, if you ever seen those.
Okay.
I really like those ones. And
okay.
Tony says hello too. So thank you, Megan. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Yeah. And Tara, thank you so much for talking to me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And you know, if I could say one thing to Gina, thank you for that and courage. And I know that a lot of DeVos did a lot of damage to Title IX. So we have to, that's one of the big things we need to all work on is making college campuses safe. So a shout out to making college campuses safe.
So what does that refer to exactly, the Title IX thing? Like,
they've changed some of the Betty DeVos before she left her post under Trump. They made it so that if on college campuses, so like if someone's accused of rape, right, that the accusers can actually file a defamation suit against the person bringing the charges and things.
Okay.
They made it much more difficult for people to bring forward the rape stories to their colleges and to get help. And it's complex, but she did a lot of damage. And there's some good, if you look at Title IX pushback, there's our article that was on my Twitter, look for it. It talks about, about the problems. And as a matter of fact, it's one of the things I'd like to work on is getting education back on the campuses and getting those things reversed. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then when you mentioned it, I do remember. I do remember that as it was going. I forgot what that would. That's what it was referred to. So, well, again, thank you so much for being here today. And everybody, check out tarareadeauthor.com. That's where you can pick out. You can get Left Out straight from there. And you can also check out those other resources there. And Tara, thank you so much for being here. And I, of course, wish you all the best in your journey.
Oh, thank you so much. It was great being on your show. Thanks a lot.